Hello everyone. So I'm going to start with my presentation, and my topic is okay, fine. It's settled. Yeah. So the topic is impact of internet structure on censorship as well as anti-censorship. So I'll just give you a brief background about what internet is composed of, and what are the various elements in that. So you can see in this.
So maybe the K one is a bit loose? What's happening now?
Yeah.
Sorry,
No, that's okay.
or is it gone now? Is the problem?
Yeah. Okay. So internet is composed of more than 50,000 autonomous systems. For those who are new to this term, for the simplicity, you can assume that they are the ISPs, internet service providers, or maybe large institutions that have some control over the ingress and the egress policies of what traffic is coming in and what traffic is going out. So over the period of many years, we have seen that various ISPs or these ASes have gone into various business relationships. That is, there are some various tiers of ISP, tier 3, tier 2, tier 1. These are the ISPs that pay money to the tier 2 ISPs and they get internet from them, and tier 2 in turns give money to tier 1, and this is how the internet routing actually works. So if the traffic has to be transited, like it's originated from an autonomous system D and it has to go to E, either the path that would be followed is like D, B, C, F, or maybe D, B, A, C, F, based on the various business relationships and other stuff. So back in 2001, Subramaniam et al. Identified that there exists some 20 autonomous systems that I'm going to call them as key ASes because they have the potential to capture large fraction of internet traffic. And it must be noted that at that point of time, they were headquartered in non-censorious countries like United States, France, and Sweden. Parallelly, internet censorship is on rise. So there are some usual suspects. There is a whole literature that talks about how China is doing censorship, how Iran is doing, and how Pakistan is doing. So they are the known usual suspects. So there are some anecdotal evidences that Sweden and France are also going to join this league. Russia is the first country that has legally passed a bill regarding the internet censorship. So the motivation of my work started with this question: what if the key ASes of the world today turn out to be censorious? If so, they might intercept a large fraction of internet paths, and rather than doing censorship in their own country, inadvertently or intentionally, they might impact the traffic coming from various other nations. And this concept is called as collateral damage in this terminology. So the overarching problem of my research was, how can the knowledge of internet maps be used to aid censorship as well as anti-censorship tools that we'll be using to bypass them. So roughly I divided my work in 5 phases. In phase 1, I looked at a very bird's eye view of how the global internet structure looks like and what is the chance that there are some key ASes that are going to do that have a potential to do large-scale censorship. And if so, does this same power holds within the countries itself? I'm going to talk about India as a use case here. And then in the third phase, what about the anti-censorship schemes what are the real evidences, and what I've analyzed in phase 1 and phase 2, does it correlate about what is happening in reality in the internet, especially in the Indian ecosphere. And then this phase 4 and phase 5, for the timing I'm not going to cover in this talk, but they generally talk about a very futuristic anti-censorship solutions like decoy routing and the impact of content distribution networks on anti-censorship. So in phase 1, as you know, I've talked about some internet maps, internet hierarchy, and internet censorship. So for that, in order to start, we need a map. So there are various approaches available to construct AS level maps for the entire globe. So these approaches basically were proposed with different intentions and different mindsets. For example, there is an organization called the SCIDA, Center for Applied Internet Data Analytics at University of California, San Diego. They readily give you a topology that they call it as a global topology, but they don't have a path from all the ISPs or all the ASes to the specific prefixes of the internet. So in this particular research, I used an approach given by Q and Gao, in which using this model, we can construct a path that originates from an autonomous system, that is an ISP, and it can terminate into whatever prefix you want. So for the people who are not aware of this, what is a prefix? So prefix is a network. Like maybe you can say it's a Google network or it's a YouTube network. So it's a cluster of various IP addresses managed by one particular organization. So this is how the internet routing goes as far as the BGP paths are concerned. So I'm just going to explain to you very briefly how this model works. So for the simplicity, you can assume, like in this particular path, these are various AS numbers. So AS1 is connected to AS2. That is, AS1 is giving money to AS2 for the internet. AS2 is giving money to AS3, and this is how things are managed in the internet. So from the point of view of the traffic originates at AS1, goes to AS2, and eventually terminates at this particular prefix. For the timing, you can assume it's a YouTube prefix. But the problem is, there are some available projects called as route views managed by University of Oregon. So they have placed some various routing collectors in the internet, and they are placed in very close proximity to various BGP speaking routers, and they are collecting the data. But from that data, we have the paths to from some selected ASs to the selected destinations, but not for the entire globe. So at this step 5, the step 5 I'm going to call as an extrapolation step, where I'm going to extrapolate this path. So assuming that from AS4 we didn't have a path to this particular prefix, and so forth for 5 and 6. So we try to extrapolate, and you can see that I've placed this check mark, and this is a cross. So this tick represents that it is a valid path. That is, there is some form of business agreement between AS1 and AS4, and thus at least I can append that AS4 to the AS1, but not with 5 and 6. So naturally this question will come, how I got this information, like which is having some business agreement between the two ASes or not. And thanks again to Qaeda, they have publicly made this dataset available, and there's a whole lot of area in this, how to infer business relationships among various ASes. So in this step 5, at least we know that okay, 4 can be extended to the existing paths available from the route views project. But again, the algorithms goes a step deeper. What if we have multiple paths between this 4 and this particular prefix? Because I'm extrapolating the path. I can add 4 to 1, and even I can add 4 to a particular AS, like 8. This is also available, like this 8 to this particular prefix, this particular path is available in the RIBs, that is from the route view project. So which path should I select? So it's a very standard network logic that the path that has the shortest length, that should be selected. But again, the question can be, what if I have a path where after extrapolating the length is also same? Then which path to select? Then Q and Gao said that we are going to select a path that has the least uncertainty value. And what I mean by uncertainty value, the number of ASes that we have added. So clearly we can select this particular path. So there are multiple heuristics given further, and this is how Q and Gao approach work. And based on this particular model, we have created various maps and inferred various other things about censorship. So with respect to censorship, what we observed was, considering 50,000 autonomous systems at one end, that is from where the path is going to be originated, and the other end, what are the various popular Alexa websites and what are the potential blocks websites of various different globe. So we converted them to their different prefixes, and we constructed paths from all the ASs to these particular prefix. And what I mean by paths, these BGP level paths that I have just shown using the Q and Gao approach. So interestingly, what we observed is, you can see in this particular figure, when we increase the number of prefixes. What I mean by number of prefixes, okay, I created a path from 50,000 autonomous systems to say Google and to YouTube. These are like popular 10 destinations, and I converted them to corresponding prefixes. So I obtained that there are 30 key ASs that are able to capture more than 90% of the AS level paths. And when I increase this particular set of prefixes, the number remained roughly same. And in the further experiments that I'm not showing here, we increased this number even to 500 prefixes of the globe. So by and large, we obtained that 30 ASes captured 90% of the AS level paths, and this model is in accordance with what Subramaniam observed many years ago. But what we obtained was, interestingly, these ASes belong to these censorious nations. They were headquartered here. And this clearly indicates that these ASes have a potential to do large-scale collateral damage in the internet. So this particular study, based on BGP maps and internet hierarchy, indicated that indeed, if the routing centralization is going to be followed like this, then certainly a large-scale censorship is possible with this. So in phase 2, I'm going to talk about whether this hierarchy exists within the nation itself or not. So you can see, is the internet hierarchical at country level? If yes, then what are the key ASes? Can censorious nations exploit this hierarchy? Because it is already known that in China and Iran, the internet has been grown intentionally in a manner that there are some few ASes with which they can control the entire internet. We focus on India, where censorship policies are unspecified or ill-defined. Just as a study of scale, it has huge number of people who are using internet. There are more than 170 ISPs and more than 900 ASes. Now I guess it's more than 1200 ASes, because this particular work is 3 years old. So India is the second largest internet user base, and there are some anecdotal evidences that internet censorship is happening, and there were some concerns that they are going to again legalize this censorship in that environment. So the question was, if in India censorship is happening, what type of content is being blocked, what are the key players, and thus to move ahead, we need a list of websites that we need to check. So there is a legal procedure called as RTI, Right to Information, where you can ask some questions to the existing government, like, can you just share the knowledge about what are the different websites that you need to block and what is the rationale behind that. So in the response to RTI, the government said that they cannot reveal these blocked websites, and what are the mechanisms that are going to be deployed for censorship that also cannot be revealed. So we curated the list of blocked websites from various sources like Citizen Lab, Verdict, and there are some leaked past government and court orders that says that such type of website should be blocked in the country. So when we curated the list, it was around 1200 URLs. They span from in different categories, ranging from escort services to social networks. This is a sample output of a very preliminary study that we did. So you can see that these 9 bars represent different ISPs in the India, and this particular snapshot talks about music sites, because we thought that music sites, they might not block it, though they were the part of this potentially blocked websites. But you can see the censorship policies are very ill-defined and they are ambivalent. Like in Airtel, 82 of the music websites were blocked, but in Reliance Jio, 77 were open. So, and this particular trend even followed for different categories like escort, pornographic, anti-censorship, and other different type of websites. So in part 2 of this phase 2, we asked this question: is it feasible for India to censor traffic in a centralized manner, or there has to be a massive rerouting needed in the entire country? So does this answer vary with the censorship approaches? So in this particular feasibility study, I created the map specifically for India and analyzed what would be the impact of IP filtering, where a censor can drop all the packets for a specific IP, and then what about DNS filtering? Is it going to corrupt all the resolvers in the country? And what about IP prefix hijacking? It's a very advanced form of a technique where an AS is just going to make a false announcement in the internet space. Hey, I am the one who owns YouTube. So rather than traffic going towards YouTube, it will be rerouted towards this particular AS that the censor controls. So using Q and GAO approach, we created the map, and again we identified that yes, hierarchy exists. With 4 ASes, we were able to capture more than 90% of the paths, and with 10 even to 95%. And after that we got some diminishing results. But still, at least this small handful number of ASes are well in a position to capture large fraction of paths, and they can do a very uniform censorship based on IP filtering. Now the question comes, this autonomous system, or I'm very casually using the word ISP, is not a single dot in the map. this AS has hundreds to thousands of routers. So this question comes, if the government wants to implement censorship in a very uniform manner, what would be the routers? And for that we need an ISP map. And no ISP will ever be willing to give its topology in public. So what we used a very old but a very stable approach given by Neil Spring earlier, that what if we have a distributed vantage machines, we have a cluster of distributed measuring machines in our control. In this particular study we used Planet Labs, Amazon EC2 and DigitalOcean machines, and roughly there were around 350 machines that I controlled. And from there we sent the trace routes, we executed trace route to various different IP addresses that belong to the ISP itself. And then we just selected that portion of the trace route that belong to the ISP under consideration. So there can be n number of questions, like how you know which part belong to the ISP and which doesn't belong to this ISP. So we used IP to AS conversions, again given by QAIDA, and there are various other inference mechanisms that we deployed, and we confirmed that, okay, in this particular traceroute path, the first IP that belong to the ISP under consideration is the one that we call as edge router, and then the core router, and finally the destination. So we observed that in this number basically varied. In some it was just 7 were required to capture more than 90% of the trace route level paths, but in some it was 1782. So for the previous 4 ASs that were able to capture 90% of the AS level paths, inside them we require a cooperation of around 4096 routers. This approach is prone to many errors, but this is the best we could have done, because in IP to AS conversion, again there are chances of error, because this is not a very foolproof, it's an active area of research still now. So this is the best that we could come up, and we identified that 4096 routers are required. So moving ahead, we wanted to analyze what would be the impact of DNS censorship. For that we required to identify what are the active resolvers in the country. So in 2016, ZMAP was not that popular, and we used Nmap, and we scanned the entire IP prefix range of India with port 53 open, and then in the second step we sent the Google as a DNS query, and from those IP addresses from which we obtained the response, we classified that yes, they are the active resolvers. And then we converted their IP addresses to the prefixes, and using again Q and GAO approach from various ASs of India, we constructed maps to those prefixes, and again we identified that over 8 ASs can capture more than 99% paths to the DNS resolvers. So certainly in these ASs they can place some middle boxes that are going to give fake response to the clients, and they can do a very effective form of DNS-based censorship in India. So the key takeaway from this particular phase was very few key ASs are required to intercept almost all AS level paths, even fewer for DNS injection. So I have not explained in detail, but for IP prefix hijacking, when we did the analysis, just one is required to have capture the internet of popular websites like YouTube and Google for the entire country. So India has a hierarchical structure, but still it follows feudal model of censorship, and yes, indeed it is feasible to implement centralized form of a censorship without requiring massive rerouting in the country, and this study holds not only good for India but others as well. So in phase 3, with which I am going to end my talk for today, in phase 3 I went ahead and I had a very closer look at the censorship at the ground level, what is happening. So the two major challenges were, there was no block list, so we just curated and we could come up with only 1200 blocked websites, and what are the censorship mechanisms, that was also not known. So in literature there are various studies about censorship in different countries. Most studies involve reporting censorship activities. Okay, in this country this is happening, that is happening. There are very few studies that actually go in detail and talks about this is the exact mechanism of the censorship, and this is the way with which you can bypass that, and most of the papers are centered around one country. In this, that is China. In this particular study, we come under the category 2. We took India and we went into the details of how censorship is happening and how can we bypass that. So this is a very typical response when you will try to access some blog website in India, and the message says your requested URL has been blocked as per the Department of Telecommunication or any competent authority, and this response also varies across ISPs to ISPs. So our research objective in this phase was exactly what are the techniques employed, what is the sequence of the protocol message that triggers the censorship infrastructure deployed, approximately what fraction of network paths are impacted by these sensors. I'm going to explain this, and we'll call this as a coverage. Coverage is a metric that we have proposed in our research. And then in the fourth question, we'll try to answer whether this censorship policies is uniform within and across the ISPs and how hard or easy it is to bypass them. So I'll start with DNS-based censorship. So for DNS-based censorship, what we did, we selected this potentially blocked websites and we tried to resolve them from the Tor exits nodes in the non-censorious countries like Ireland. You need not rely on Tor. If you have some endpoint in that country, you can directly resolve from them. The goal was to obtain a set of IP address that we could assume that they are unblocked because they are in that non-censorious country. In the second step, without using Tor or anything, we just directly resolved the potentially blocked websites. And then we tried to find the intersection between step 1 and step 2. For those websites where we obtained, yes, there is an overlapping set of IP addresses, certainly they are not blocked. Certainly they are not blocked because one of the set of IP addresses were obtained from a non-censorious country. So that was the assumption we made. So out of 1200, let's assume 400 were directly removed because they were not blocked based on DNS. So what about the rest 800? For that we had just two simple heuristics. That is, what if the resolved IP is a Bovon IP? That's a private IP. Certainly it's an act of censorship because a website that is running should not ever give back a private IP. And another thing was, so the website that we were accessing, we went to their home pages and confirmed that they were not hosted in the ASes of the Indian subcontinent. So what if the IPs that we obtained, they belong to the same AS where the client resides? That could also be considered as an act of DNS censorship. So we removed few websites in that particular category. And let's assume 400 more we removed, considering them that they are DNS-based censored. But what about the remaining 400? For remaining 400, what we did, in order to be absolutely sure, the IP addresses that we obtained in step 2, we want to be very sure that they are the correct and they are the ones that are hosting the website. So we sent HTTP request from the clients we control to that particular IP addresses via Tor. Because if there is another censorship happening at the HTTP level or everything, that we want to ensure that's not going to play a role. And if we got the response, the web page response from the IPs that we obtained in step 2, it ensured that certainly this is not the DNS-based censorship and we have got the correct IP. So DNS-based censorship can actually happen in 2 ways. That is, the censor has actually corrupted the resolvers. That is, there is some software running in the resolver. When you are going to access a potentially blocked website, the resolver will give you a fake IP. Or the other way is that they can install a middle box between the client and the resolver. On the path where the DNS query is going to be intercepted by the middle box, that particular middle box will give you a fake IP address. So how we confirmed that? We based our idea on the trace route. We sent the DNS queries with potentially blocked website with increasing TTL. So even if let's assume there is a middle box which is at the hop 4, after intercepting the DNS queries, it's going to respond with a fake IP. Otherwise, if the censorship is happening at the last hop, certainly we should get this censorship response or the corrupted IP address from the last hop. Otherwise, we'll get a standard IP address. So this is how we went ahead and we did this study, and we named it as iterative network tracer, where we incremented the TTL step by step. In India, DNS manipulation was the case, that is DNS poisoning. We never observed any middle box in the middle. It was always the DNS resolvers that were corrupted. So, in DNS censorship, the question came, what would be the coverage and what is the consistency? And what I mean by coverage is, like fraction of all the DNS resolvers that are poisoned. What if there are 1000 resolvers that are active in an ISP, and out of those 1000, 900 are like doing some form of censorship? So we will call that the coverage is 90% within the ISP. So there are two government operated ISPs, MTNL and BSNL. We obtained strikingly different results. In MTNL it was 85.4 and in BSNL it was just 9.3. So the question again comes for the consistency. Let's assume there are 100 resolvers that are doing some form of blocking. So ideally a single website that is being blocked by an ISP, it should be blocked by all the resolvers. So that we call as consistency. For every filtered URL, we determine the fraction of poisoned DNS resolvers that are blocking it. You can see for the case of MTNL, a single website, this shows a website ID, like it's a website name, so I just removed the name and I gave the IDs to different websites. So website 50 is roughly being blocked by 50% of the resolvers, and in MTNL and in BSNL, the same website is being blocked by 10% of the resolvers. So this shows that there is not much consistency among the resolver itself. So this shows a poor implementation of censorship within the ISP based on coverage and consistency. With that, I move to a next level detection scheme, that is HTTP censorship. For that, what we did, we obtained the content of potentially blocked websites through various Tor circuits exiting in non-censorious countries and assumed that the response that we are getting is unfiltered, and then we directly obtained the response from the ISPs under consideration. So what we did, we tried to find the HTTP diff between step 1 and step 2. And for that, where there was more than 30% of the difference, we considered that, okay, we need to go for the manual inspection, unless we assume that they are uncensored. So the question that can be asked is, what was the censorship triggering field in the protocol packets? So when we sent the GET request with various HTTP header variations, we obtained that in the GET request there is a host field, and when the host field has this evil.com, that is the potentially blocked websites, the censor gets triggered. In India, we obtained two types of middle boxes. One we called as wiretapping middle boxes, and other we called as interceptive middle boxes. And now I am going to explain you how two different types of middle boxes work. So in the interceptive middle boxes, the censor will just allow you to do a three-way handshake very happily, and then when the client is going to send an HTTP GET request with this blocked.com, the censor will send you an HTTP 200 OK packet, and in the 200 OK packet, there will be a block message that I have shown you earlier. This website has been blocked, and this HTTP 200 OK packet had a FIN bit set at the TCP layer. And this is an interceptive middle box. No packet from the client is allowed to reach to the other destination when the censorship triggering has happened. So that's the reason you can see when the FIN came, this machine naturally generated FINAC. This never allowed even to FINAC to reach that site, and eventually the connection was closed. So the reset generated by the client is different from the reset generated by the censor and that is sent to this particular machine. So we did an intelligent experiment where I controlled this particular server. So I did a three-way handshake with me, with the server that I controlled, and then I sent this block.com, and that from that we obtained, we inferred that all those packets that a client sent after the triggering event were not being allowed to reach the other destination. So we tried various different combinations with FIN, with ACK, with reset, so many things we tried, but not even a single packet was reached, and there was a timeout for that, and roughly it was for 2 minutes. So there is another type of middle boxes, we call that as wiretapping middle boxes, because in this particular middle box, we believe that a copy of HTTP GET request is sent to the middle box from the router itself. So what happens is, three-way handshake happens, you send an HTTP GET request, there is a block.com in the GET request, but this block.com GET request is allowed to reach the other side. But and moreover, we obtain an HTTP 200 OK block message from the censor with FIN bit set. So the difference between the intercepted and the wiretapping is that in intercepted, probably it's like a proxying connection kind of stuff, where the censor is intercepting everything and it's not allowing you to send your packets to the other side. But in wiretapping, the packets do reach there. So you can see the FIN bit come, and then in order to be doubly sure, they even send a reset packet. So since the fill has come and the reset has come, this machine generates reset and the connection is terminated. But we do observe that since the HTTP GET request reaches this end side, we get the web content also. But till that point, the connection has been closed and client cannot access the web content. So again, for HTTP censorship, we came up with the metrics called as coverage and consistency. For the time being, I'm just going to move ahead and just show you the results of what is coverage and consistency. So you can see in Airtel, there's a very high coverage, like the middle box is there on multiple router level paths, and with respect to consistency, you can see that Idea is an ISP where they are doing, where they are blocking 80%, where the 80% of the middle boxes are blocking the same set of websites. So moving ahead and coming to the anti-censorship approaches, for DNS poisoning, it was very simple. We just changed our resolver to 8.8.8, and since the DNS poisoning was happening and there was no middle box involved, we could happily bypass that. But for HTTP filtering, there were, for different middle boxes, we need to come up with different approaches, where this was a very simple scheme. We just changed the letter, the case of this word host with this different type of combinations. So middle box was not able to understand, but the server understood, because the RFC says that host is case insensitive. And then, as you can see in this particular slide, if I'm going to drop this fin bit packet and the reset packet, my connection is not going to be closed. Just remove these two red arrows, and then after some time you'll get a web content. So dropping the reset and the fin bit packets from the middle box also helped. So it can be argued that how we know that the fin and the reset are coming from the middle boxes. Interestingly, in India, all these middle boxes have a unique IP ID that has a 242 number. IP ID is a field in IP header, and from that we identified. So this is how we basically came up with anti-censorship approaches, and then eventually we bypassed all possible censorship schemes that are deployed in India. And with that I come to phase 4, but now I'll just conclude my talk with this.
Thank you very much.